The spear went through the young
my
giraffe's chest,
God.
and nobody in the village moved to stop it. Samuel stood at the edge of his tent, watching the impossible happen in front of him. The animal, a male, no more than 2 years old, with spots so perfect they looked like someone had painted them onto his golden skin, made a sound that was not a roar or a scream. It was something softer and more terrible than that. It was the sound of confusion, the sound of an animal that could not understand why the world had suddenly turned so wrong, why the tall creatures with spears had come at dawn to hurt him. The spear had been thrown by Kobus, a man Samuel had known his whole life. Kobus was the strongest hunter in the village, a man with scars running down his right cheek like marks of honor earned through a lifetime of survival on the African grassland. Right now, Kobus was grinning. His teeth were showing, and his body was already reaching for another spear from the pile beside him. Behind Kobus stood 40 other men, all from the village, all holding weapons, all watching to see what would happen next. The young giraffe staggered forward. His impossibly long legs, which should have carried him away from danger with graceful speed, suddenly seemed like a curse rather than a gift. They bent beneath him as if they could no longer remember how to work. The animal took 3 more steps, then collapsed into the red dust of the African earth. It was early morning, maybe an hour after sunrise. The sun was still low in the sky, but already burning hot. The air smelled like dry grass and distant water. Clouds hung above the horizon in shapes that meant no rain was coming soon. Everything about this morning was ordinary: the light, the smell, the temperature. Everything except for the fact that murder was happening, and Samuel was watching it without moving, without speaking, without doing anything at all. The mother giraffe made a sound then. It was a low, rumbling noise that came from deep inside her chest. She was much larger than the young male. She had lived perhaps 30 or more years, and her neck was scarred from old battles with other males during mating season. Her spots were faded and worn, like a map of a long life lived on this grassland. She had 2 calves with her. One was the male, who had just been struck down. The other was a smaller female, maybe only a year old, still staying close to her mother's legs. The mother giraffe stepped toward her dying son, and immediately the line of men shifted. Kobus shouted a command, and the entire group of hunters tensed, ready to strike at the mother the moment she came within range. The older giraffe stopped moving. She seemed to understand what the message meant. If she tried to protect her child, they would kill her too. If she tried to reach him, her other calf would be left alone and defenseless. Samuel found himself holding his breath. He did not know he was doing it until his lungs began to burn and force him to breathe again. His eyes were locked on the mother giraffe's face. She was staring at her son, watching him struggle in the dust. She was making a choice, Samuel realized. She was deciding what to do when all of her choices were terrible. The young male was not dead yet. His body was still moving. His legs were still trying to kick, still trying to push him up from the ground. His eyes were still open. Samuel could see those eyes from where he stood, perhaps 50 meters away. The eye closest to him was dark and round and full, an animal intelligence that was trying desperately to understand what was happening to him. 3 weeks ago, this exact moment had been decided in a council tent. Samuel had been there. He had sat in a circle with 60 other men from the village, and they had debated the question that everyone had been avoiding for months. What do we do about the giraffes? The drought had come hard to the region. It was the 3rd year without proper rain. The rivers had stopped flowing. The wells were dropping lower and lower each month. The village's main water source, the spring at the edge of the settlement that had sustained them for generations, was now the only reliable water in 100 kilometers. And the giraffes had started coming to drink from it. It made sense from an animal's perspective. Of course the giraffes came there. It was the only water. But the giraffes drank enormous amounts. One single adult giraffe could consume what 6 cattle could consume in a day. The village had 300 cattle that kept them alive. The cattle provided milk, provided meat, provided wealth and status and security. Without the cattle, the village would starve. The old men of the village had explained this in careful voices, trying to make it sound like a question when it was really already a decision. Do we let the animals die because they drink our water? Or do we let ourselves die to protect the animals? It had seemed obvious then. It had seemed like survival, like necessary action, like the kind of hard choice that adults had to make. Samuel had voted to kill the giraffes. He had voted alongside every other man in that tent. The decision had been unanimous. But that was in a tent, in the abstract. That was a number: kill the animals, protect the village. This was different. This was a mother watching her child die in the dust. This was a sound that Samuel would hear for the rest of his life every time he closed his eyes. This was the moment when an abstract decision became a real, terrible, permanent thing. The smaller female calf made a noise, a small bleating sound, and she pressed herself harder against her mother's legs. The mother giraffe did not move to help her dying son. She could not. To move was to expose her living child to danger. To stay still was to watch her son die. There was no good choice here. There was only survival and loss. Kobus pulled back his arm to throw another spear. This one would be aimed at the mother. This was how it would end, with all 3 giraffes dead in the dust, their bodies too large to move, their blood soaking into the red earth that had sustained them for their whole lives. But then, in the distance, Samuel heard something that made every person in the village turn their head toward the horizon. It was the sound of hoofbeats. Not the hoofbeats of horses ridden by the village hunters. These hoofbeats were different. There were too many of them, coming too fast, moving with military precision. The sound grew louder and louder still, until the very air seemed to vibrate with the thunder of approaching animals. The hunters lowered their weapons. Even Kobus, with his scarred face and his murderous eyes, looked uncertain for the first time that morning. Something was coming toward the village. Something that would change everything about what was happening in the dust in front of them. The first rider appeared on the horizon, like a dark shape cut out of the golden morning light. Then came another, then another. Within seconds, the skyline was filled with silhouettes, horses and riders, moving in perfect formation, their shapes growing larger and clearer as they approached the village at tremendous speed. The dust they kicked up rose high into the air, turning the morning light orange and thick and heavy. Samuel counted without thinking. 10 riders, 20 riders, 30 riders. The number kept growing, and his heart kept beating faster with each new figure that emerged from the dust cloud. By the time the lead rider was close enough that Samuel could see his face clearly, the count had reached well over 100. These were not villagers. These were not hunters from neighboring settlements. These were soldiers or rangers, or something official that Samuel's mind could not quite categorize. The lead rider pulled hard on the reins of a black horse, and the animal skidded to a stop in a spray of red dust. The horse was beautiful and strong, with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything happening around it. The rider sat tall in the saddle, and even from a distance, Samuel could see that this was a man accustomed to authority. His face was weathered by sun and by something else, maybe worry, maybe anger, maybe the weight of carrying bad news across a long distance. The man's name was David Kinyanjui. Samuel would learn his name within minutes, but in this moment, watching him dismount from his horse in one smooth motion, Samuel knew only that everything was about to change. David walked toward the center of the village slowly. His boots crunched on the dry grass. Behind him, his team of rangers and wildlife officers spread out in a wide arc, their horses creating a barrier between the hunters and the giraffes. The message was clear without any words being spoken. This would not continue. The killing would stop here. Kobus took a step forward, his hand still holding the spear he had been about to throw. His voice came out hard and challenging. He said, "This is our village. These are our animals to deal with. You have no authority here." David did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked past Kobus and moved toward the dead giraffe in the dust. The young male was no longer moving now. His body was still. His eyes were still open, still fixed on something that only he could see. David knelt beside the animal and placed his hand on the creature's neck, feeling for a pulse that was no longer there. He stayed in that position for a long time, long enough that the entire village fell silent, long enough that even the wind seemed to stop moving. When David finally stood up and turned to face the crowd, his eyes were hard. Not angry exactly, but something colder than anger, something like disappointment mixed with determination. He said, "I have been traveling for 3 days to reach this village. I came because I received information that there was a problem here. I came to help solve it. What I found instead was a massacre." Samuel felt something shift in the air around him. The word massacre hung in the space between David and the villagers, heavy with meaning. Kobus's face darkened with rage. He said, "These are giraffes, not people. We did what was necessary." David's laugh was brief and harsh, like the sound of something breaking. He said, "Did you? Is that what you call this? Necessary?" David gestured to one of his rangers, a young woman with a serious face and eyes that showed she had seen terrible things before. The ranger brought forward a large wooden chest and set it down on the ground in front of the village. David opened it slowly, deliberately, as if he wanted everyone to understand the importance of what they were about to see. Inside the chest were papers, dozens and dozens of papers, covered in official stamps and signatures and text that had been printed by government machines in the capital city far away. David held up one of the papers so that everyone could see it clearly. He said, "This is a hydrological survey. It was conducted by scientists from the National Water Authority. It was submitted to your village elders 3 months ago. Does anyone here want to know what it says?" The village was silent. Samuel's mouth had gone dry. He suddenly remembered receiving a stack of papers, remembered holding them in his hands, remembered feeling the weight of them. He remembered something else, too. He remembered Kobus coming to his tent that same evening. David continued, "This survey shows that the water level in your spring has actually increased since the rainy season. It shows that the water capacity here is 40% higher than it was last year. It shows that there is more than enough water for all of your cattle, for all of your people, and for all of the giraffes in this region." The words hit the village like a physical force. Samuel saw the realization wash across people's faces, the understanding that everything. The sun had climbed higher in the sky by the time the truth fully unraveled. What had started as a morning of killing had turned into an afternoon of revelation and reckoning. David's rangers had begun to systematically document everything: the dead giraffes, the weapons, the illegal animal parts that Kobus had hidden throughout the village. As they worked, more and more evidence emerged from places where Kobus had thought it was safe to hide. In a storage shed behind Kobus's house, the rangers found 6 more giraffe skins carefully prepared for sale on the black market. They found elephant tusks wrapped in cloth. They found documents written in English that showed orders from wealthy collectors in countries far away, men and women who wanted to own pieces of African wildlife and were willing to pay large sums of money for them. The ivory trade was illegal. The rhino horn trade was illegal. All of it was against international law, but Kobus had been doing it anyway, slowly becoming wealthy while pretending to protect his village. Samuel stood and watched as the rangers carefully placed each item into evidence bags. He felt sick. The man he had known his whole life, the man he had trusted with his survival, had been a criminal all along, and Samuel had never questioned it. Samuel had never looked closely enough to see the truth that was hidden in plain sight. Kobus was now surrounded by 6 armed rangers. His hands were bound behind his back with plastic restraints. His face had gone from red with rage to pale with fear as he realized that his secret life was about to be exposed to the entire world. He tried to speak, tried to explain, but David would not let him. David said, "You will have your chance to speak, but it will be in a court of law, not in this village. You will answer for what you have done, and you will answer to more than just this community." A vehicle had arrived, a large truck that had driven through the grassland from the nearest government office. The rangers carefully loaded Kobus into the vehicle. As he was being driven away, he looked back at the village one final time. Samuel saw no remorse in his face, only anger and calculation. Even now, even facing arrest, Kobus was still a man without conscience, still trying to figure out how to escape or manipulate his way out of this situation. But there was no escaping this. The evidence was too solid. The documents were too clear. The paper trail that Kobus had left behind would lead to his conviction and imprisonment. The rangers explained this to the village as they continued their work. The afternoon became very quiet. People moved through the village slowly, talking in low voices. Some families were angry at Kobus. Others were angry at the village elders for being fooled. Still others were angry at themselves for believing lies without verification. The anger mixed with grief and shame created an atmosphere that was heavy and painful. An old man named Jacob, who had been a hunter all his life and had taught Kobus everything he knew about tracking and survival, sat alone at the edge of the village. He was crying. A younger man approached him and asked what was wrong. Jacob said, "I taught him to hunt. I taught him to respect the animals and the land. But somewhere along the way, he lost that respect, and I did not notice. I should have noticed. A teacher should always know when his student becomes something terrible." The water source, the thing that had caused all of this conflict, still sat undisturbed at the edge of the village. It was full and clean and abundant. David's rangers tested it and confirmed what the hydrological survey had already shown. There was more than enough water here for everyone and everything that lived in this region. The shortage was not real. The crisis had been partly imagined and partly created by Kobus to justify his plan. As the sun began to move toward the western horizon, David gathered the village together. He stood in the center, and all the villagers, men, women, children, elders, sat in a large circle around him. His voice was not angry when he spoke. It was sad, which somehow made it more powerful. He said, "What happened here today will take a long time to heal. 3 giraffes are dead. They will not come back. An entire breeding line has been ended. For at least a generation, there will be no natural giraffes born in this region because of the choice that was made this morning." David paused, letting those words settle over the village like a heavy blanket. He continued, "But I did not come here today only to bring bad news. I came here with something else. I came with an opportunity. If you choose to take it." Everyone leaned forward. The word opportunity had cut through the grief and shame, offering something that felt like it might be hope. David said, "The breeding program for Rothschild's giraffes, the same species that you killed today, still exists in protected reserves to the north. These animals are critically endangered. There are only a few hundred left in the entire world. I had come to this village to ask permission to bring 2 breeding giraffes here, to establish a new population in this region. The goal was to help save the species and to create a protected sanctuary." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. If Kobus had not killed the animals this morning, if the truth had been known from the beginning, the village could have been part of saving an entire species. Instead, they had been part of destroying it. David continued, "The question now is whether your village wants to participate in a new program. Whether you want to transform this place into a wildlife sanctuary instead of a hunting ground. Whether you want to become protectors instead of killers." The village was silent. This was a choice that would change everything about their way of life. This was an invitation to become something different than what they had been. An elder named Grace, A woman with deep lines on her face that showed a long life of hard work and hard decisions stood up. She said, "We made a terrible mistake today. We allowed one man's lies to destroy 3 lives. We cannot bring those lives back. But perhaps we can make sure that their deaths mean something. Perhaps we can protect other giraffes so that their species does not disappear from this world." One by one, other villagers stood and agreed. Some were hesitant. Some were still struggling with what they had learned. But most of them understood that their village had been given a chance for redemption, a chance to transform their mistake into something meaningful. David smiled for the first time that day. He said, "Then we will begin the work together. We will build a sanctuary. We will bring breeding giraffes to this place. And every person in this village will become a guardian of these animals instead of their destroyer." As the sun set over the grassland, painting the sky orange and pink and gold, the village began to transform. The killing was over. The deception was exposed. And something new was beginning to grow from the ashes of what had been destroyed. 6 months had passed since the day the giraffes died. Samuel stood at the water source and barely recognized the place anymore. Everything had changed. The area was no longer just a place where thirsty animals came to drink. It had been transformed into something larger and more beautiful. A protective fence had been built around part of the spring, creating a safe zone where animals could drink without fear of hunters. A small research station had been constructed nearby, with scientists and rangers coming and going regularly to monitor the wildlife and the water quality. The morning was cool and still. Samuel had arrived early, before the sun rose high enough to make the heat unbearable. He was working as a guide now, training to show visitors around the new sanctuary that the village had created. It was difficult work sometimes, emotionally difficult, because he had to tell the story of what had happened here to every group of tourists who came to see the giraffes. He always made sure to tell them about the day of the killing. He always explained how one man's lies had nearly destroyed an entire species in this region. He always described the moment when the young giraffe fell in the dust, and he watched people's faces fill with horror and sadness as they understood what had happened. This was part of his punishment and his redemption, to carry the weight of that knowledge and to use it to educate others. In the distance, Samuel heard a sound that made him smile despite his serious thoughts. It was the sound of a young giraffe calling to its mother. The new breeding pair that David had brought to the sanctuary 6 months ago had given birth 2 weeks ago. A Kappa-perfect, healthy, beautiful male with spots so perfect they looked painted on, just like the young giraffe that had died on this very ground. Samuel walked toward the sound, moving carefully and slowly so he would not disturb the animals. When he reached them, he stopped and simply watched. The mother giraffe was a beautiful creature, young and strong, with intelligent eyes that held no fear of humans. She had been born in a protected reserve, raised by people who understood how to care for her. She had never known the wild the way the murdered giraffe had known it, but she was here now, and she was thriving. The calf was still learning how to use its long legs properly. It stumbled slightly as it walked, and the mother giraffe lowered her neck to make sure it stayed close to her body. The sight of them together, mother and child, safe and alive, made Samuel's chest ache with emotions he could not quite name. It was grief mixed with hope, sadness mixed with joy, regret mixed with gratitude. The water source was as abundant as David's survey had promised. There was water enough for the cattle that the village still kept, though fewer now than before. There was water for the local birds and the smaller animals that came to drink. And there was water for the giraffes, the new giraffes that represented a second chance, a possibility of redemption that had not existed 6 months ago. Samuel's work as a guide had changed his life in ways he had not expected. Tourists came from all over the world to see the sanctuary. They came from America, from Europe, from Asia, from countries Samuel had never heard of before. They paid money to stay in the village and to learn about what had happened here. This money had been used to build better schools, better medical facilities, and better housing for the families who had chosen to participate in the sanctuary project. Not everyone in the village had chosen to stay. About 30 families had left, unable to accept what had happened, unable to bear the shame of being part of the killing. They had moved to other settlements where they could return to the old ways of hunting and living off the land. The village did not try to stop them. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, and some people find it impossible to live in a place where they are constantly reminded of their mistakes. But most of the village had stayed. They had done the hard work of learning to see themselves differently. They had learned to take pride in being protectors instead of hunters. The young children of the village now grew up knowing that giraffes were their neighbors and their responsibility, not their enemies. Kobus had gone to trial in Nairobi 3 months ago. The trial had been public, and news of it had spread far and wide. He had been convicted on multiple charges: illegal wildlife trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder of endangered species, fraud, and several other crimes. He had been sentenced to 15 years in prison. During the trial, it had been revealed that his criminal network extended far beyond just this village. He had been buying and selling illegal animal parts for over a decade, moving through multiple African countries and working with international smuggling rings. When Samuel learned of the conviction, he had felt something shift inside himself. Justice had been served, not just for the giraffes, but for the entire ecosystem that Kobus had been damaging for years. The satisfaction was real, but it did not bring back the animals that had been killed. The village had created a memorial at the water source. It was a simple stone with words carved into it, in both the local language and in English. The words read, "In memory of the giraffes who died here on this day. May their deaths remind us that truth matters more than lies, and that courage matters more than comfort." People visited the memorial sometimes. Some left flowers or small gifts. Children would place their hands on the stone and ask their parents to tell them the story of what had happened. The story had become part of the village's identity, a cautionary tale that would be told for generations. Samuel stood at the water source and thought about the moment 6 months ago when he had turned away from the screaming. That moment still haunted him, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was what he had done in the months since, the work of telling the truth, of taking responsibility, of helping to build something beautiful and meaningful from something terrible and destructive. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Samuel saw a vehicle approaching from the distance. It was David, coming for one of his regular visits to check on the sanctuary. David had become a frequent visitor to the village, helping to train rangers, ensuring that the breeding program was being managed correctly, and supporting the community as it continued to heal and transform. Samuel waved, and David waved back. When David reached him, he placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder and said, "How are the new giraffes doing?" Samuel said, "The calf is healthy, growing strong. The mother is protective but calm. They are adapting well." David nodded. He said, "Good. That is good. Do you remember what you told me 3 months ago? You said that you were not sure you could ever stop feeling guilty about what happened here." Samuel said, "I remember." David said, "Guilt is not a bad thing if it leads to change. You have changed. The village has changed. The sanctuary is saving lives. Every tourist who comes here learns the truth about what happened. Every person who visits this place goes back to their country and tells others about the importance of protecting wildlife. The 3 giraffes that died here have become a lesson that will protect thousands of other animals. Their deaths mean something now." Samuel looked at the young giraffe drinking water from the spring, at its mother standing guard, at the abundance of life that was growing in this place. He understood what David was saying. The past could not be changed, but the future still belonged to them, and they were building it carefully and intentionally. As the afternoon light filled the sanctuary with golden warmth, Samuel felt something settle in his chest. It was not happiness exactly, but it was peace. It was the understanding that even the darkest moments of human failure could be transformed into opportunities for growth and healing. The giraffes had given him a second chance. He was determined not to waste it. The water source flowed on, abundant and pure, as it had flowed before the killing, and as it would flow long after everyone who had lived through that terrible day was gone. Life continued. The world moved forward. And in this small corner of Africa, a village had learned that redemption was possible, even when it came at the cost of unspeakable loss.